Hey, this is the Procurement Pulse. I'm Evan. I'm here with Friddy and Jared Paget. And today we're going to be asking some questions. Jared, you've led transformations across continents and industries. What convinced you that SNOP and Lean should be the foundation of how you operate?
I think what in my experience, what I've seen throughout my career is that if you fail to plan, you heard the phrase, fail to plan, you plan to fail. And that's absolutely true in supply chain. When you get your forecast right, when you have a good, strong S&OP program, it lays the groundwork for everything in the future. A company that is not doing it right is going to end up failing, and they're going to either over or under purchase. They're not going to be available, or they're not going to have product available to support the customers. So
Right.
absolutely critical foundation for any business is knowing what you need to build and what you need to have prepared for your customer.
Yeah. And is there any specific project or moment in your background that really solidified those beliefs for you when it comes to planning?
Yeah, absolutely. I took on a role, boy, it's probably 15 years ago with a company called Nuvea USA. It was a carve out of Nestle, and I was hired to build the supply chain essentially. And we had just an amazing team. The sales team and our operations team worked just hand in hand. We had excellent forecasting, an excellent S&OP process, really high levels of accuracy in our forecasting. And as a result, our ability to serve the needs of our customer was very high. So we had 99.8% on time, in full deliveries to all of our customers, regardless of their size. And there are a lot of factors that go into that. We had a factory where we built probably about 60% of our product. And so by using lean to integrate with our factory, not building too much and being flexible in our production and recognizing that and adjusting to it, it made a huge difference. So we were able to actually reduce our inventory that we had on hand by 50%. When I started, my boss, one of the first things he told me was my goal was you need to come in. Our inventory has been heavy for a long time in this business because it was the other business that wasn't being looked at. And the goal was to reduce 50%, which I thought was absurd. I thought, oh, there's no way we're ever going to achieve that. 50% reduction in inventory is just something I couldn't imagine. But over time, we were able to do it. And not to spoil the whole story, but the goal of lean is to keep things in their, I guess, least process state. So we had a plastic injection molding factory. And so we had silos of plastic that we used. And so my ideal state of being from our material was in that silo full of plastic pellets. And then as we needed them, move them through the process. But one of the things they had been doing for a long time before that was building ahead. They'll build ahead 6 months worth of inventory so they can minimize their changeovers. And so when we embraced quick turnovers, quick changeovers, it made all the difference.
And that would have been my question. How did that affect overhead and production costs? Because I've been in early on in my career in a scenario where we did the complete opposite. It was high-end furniture that was supposed to be custom built. So we had a state where they call it whitewashed, or where it's basically just the raw furniture wood piece without any finish on it, because the finishing could go any different ways because it was supposed to be custom. And the team there tried to keep overhead costs low and kind of make sure that the manufacturing side hit their production goals and hit their goals. But in the end, they just increased warehouses full of semi-finished inventory that in the end was never sold. And because it was high-end furniture, they actually never released it to a dealership or anything. So I actually ended up being fortunate and ended up buying furniture that was valued or that was sold for $10,000 at employee auctions for $10 a piece.
Nice.
So I have, still to this day, I have the desk I'm sitting at. It's actually a prototype that never went into production. So there's actually only one of those exists, but I have a lot of furniture that I bought in my time there because, we had competing goals, right? The manufacturing side had a goal of hitting their numbers, keeping overhead low, keeping people employed, and balancing out the ups and downs of custom high-end furniture. While I think on the financial side, it was a terrible move because the end result was that we were losing money, but because we were part of a larger organization, running out of cash wasn't really the issue because they knew we had that backup. But it created a weird scenario where we had warehouses full of semi-finished furniture that in the end never got sold. And yeah, I think the exact opposite of what you're describing is right. We didn't have quick turnaround times, setup times. We didn't embrace lean. So the only way they felt like they could handle the situation was by building ahead, like you described. And I think in the end, we're bought by a Chinese furniture manufacturer.
And I would argue that there's a lot of issues here, obviously, but one of the challenges, you didn't know what you were going to sell. And that's why you were making things that you didn't have a plan for, because you weren't sure what you were going to sell. And so they built something just to keep the factory going. And that's a pitfall that a lot of companies run into. And that's the key to SNOP, is that you're identifying exactly what it is that you want to build, rather than building something with the hopes that somebody comes along and wants to buy it.
So how do you do that? How do you figure out what you're going to sell?
Yeah, I should argue that baby products, this is a baby products business, and baby products are super flat. There's a year-end reset at all of the major retailers, but aside from that, babies are born at a pretty consistent rate in the United States. It's a very slow changing up and down. It doesn't peak in March or peak in February because more babies are born. That's just not how it works. So we had that luxury where our production could be flat during the year. And some industries, if you're making water balloons, we don't sell very many of those in February. So you have to adjust for that. Couple different things. I think one, first and foremost, is you have to have a really good understanding of the market, and you have to have a very good, as an operations person, have a great relationship with your sales team. They are the most important piece because they are the boots on the ground. They see everything that's happening in the market, or hopefully they're seeing everything that's happening in the market, and they're going to drive a lot of the information that's coming in. So you have historical data that you can use as a baseline, but then you need to tweak it, and it's up to the sales team to help you tweak that. Two things that are important here. One, something that we did is we tied their compensation to their accuracy of their forecast. So the better they did forecasting, the more money they got. And that's a huge incentive. And not every business is going to be able to do that. That's fine. That was a unique thing for us. We were a newly formed entity, so we could do something like that. The other thing I think, though, is in the relationship is if your sales team trusts that you can deliver what they forecast, then they're going to want to forecast what they're going to want to sell. If they don't forecast, let's look at the other way. If they don't forecast and you're building a desk that you have no home for, that takes away from your ability to supply what they're looking for. And so helping your sales team understand, hey, look, we're in this together. I want to build what you're going to sell. I don't have any interest in building anything else at all. So if I can come in and say, or if the sales team can come in and say, I'm going to sell 2,000 of these next month. Okay, I'm going to make 2,000 of them. You better sell them. And they can trust that product is going to be ready for them when they need it. So it's a two-way street, right? So we're providing them certainty that they are going to have supply that they need to satisfy their customers.
Yeah, absolutely. And then circling back, right, on the lean process, because I think that was a major pitfall for us, because sometimes there was a 20-step, 30, 40-step finishing process that just takes forever but takes away from trying to mass manufacture a custom high-end product. I always felt was just not working, right? And I think the true high-end custom manufactured pieces that are out there, they have to be lean, they have to be agile, right? They have to be able to react quickly to demand and not say, okay, because we aren't set up that way, we have to bring everything to a semi-finished state, hoping we got the numbers right, and then go from there. So how important is lean, and where would you start on that lean journey?
Lean is absolutely critical, and really just understanding your processes and understanding where things are happening. I think that's the baseline, obviously. Somebody explained lean to me once. They said, look, lean is nothing more than common sense. And I couldn't agree more. If you really take it and boil it down to this, it's common sense. One of the principles of lean that I think resonates the most with me is the idea of building waste. So if you build something into a product that doesn't have value to the customer, that's waste. If you build something extra that's going to sit on the shelf, every moment it sits on the shelf, that's waste. Every time you move a product physically from one place to another, that's waste. So you want to minimize all of those pieces of waste. You want to keep product in its most infant state as long as you possibly can, because as soon as you customize it, as soon as if it's a
Once you
pacifier,
process
for
it,
example, as soon as you put it in a package, that's all it can ever be. As soon as you build the table, you have a couple different finishes, but you can't build a chair out of that wood anymore. That's done. And you can't change the dimensions, or I guess you could maybe shrink it down. I don't know a whole lot about furniture manufacturing and tables, but maybe you can slice a part off and put the legs in a different spot. But for the most part, you're going to add a lot more extra work, right, in that process. It's really looking at what you're doing. And for us, it was focusing on keeping things in their most infant state. And so we had, again, 65% of our product was built in house. And so we had the ability to make quick changeovers, to double. I think it wasn't double. I think we had a staff of maintenance folks who changed out our molds in our presses for plastic injection molding. And by hiring an extra person, we could save millions of dollars. So that makes perfect sense. And so you have to look at this in scope of what am I doing? And is the investment in the flexibility going to pay off in the end? But you hit on a really important issue, Friddy, is when you're making custom products, how do you implement lean? And that can be really challenging. And I've worked in an environment where the products and it was furniture, actually medical furniture, where the products weren't custom, but we had a whole bunch of products and you couldn't just build them all at the same time. You had to decide what you were going to build. And they had different components. And so if you build it in a cell, you have to set aside the cell and make it just for that product, or you have to have all the components in that cell for all of the chairs or tables or whatever it may be. So it's really approaching it. That cell idea is of being flexible and being able to grab the parts you need at arm's length when you need them is critical. And so there are a lot of things in the manufacturing process that you can pull time out of a process by making parts available, moving operations to different locations. That's important. And creating the lean mindset. Another part of lean, obviously, is identifying or helping create this culture of lean. So I think a lot of companies, they run the risk of management telling their workers what to do. And I almost take the opposite approach, where I know that the person that does this 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, is a million times better at doing this than I am. They know this process just hands down. And one of my secrets is I'll go sit with the operator, just me. I'll go sit. I won't have a big event or anything. I'll go and sit, and we do those, but I'll sit with the operator and work with them and say, okay, let me watch what you're doing. Let me try to do what you're doing. And then I ask them, what is it that we can do that makes this easier for you? And when you ask them, how can we improve the efficiency? People they balk at that. They don't understand what you're asking a lot of times. And if they do, it makes them feel uncomfortable. But everybody knows how to make their job easier. Everybody knows that. And often when you make their job easier, you make it more efficient. Because they're saying, every time I get this part, I've got to look at it to make sure that the part it got cut maybe. And that's an issue that's coming down the pipeline from them. And so we're not doing something right in the process upstream. So asking them and understanding what their pain points are will help you introduce lean to these folks.
Right. Yeah, and I think, having that buy-in, where you can have the processes and you can have the systems and the technology, but if you don't have the culture buy-in, in the end, you're not going to get anything out of it. So that would have been my question. Where do you start with the process? And I think you answered it. It's sitting down with the operators and figuring out, okay, getting the buy-in and figuring out where do we have the bottlenecks, where can we improve the process, where can we make things easier for them, and then go from there.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. I think that there is an introduction that needs to be had. I think you can't just show up and say, so what's going on, to create that mindset. But there's a value in sitting everybody down and say, hey, look, we want to make things more efficient. Why do we want to make things more efficient? And it's a good idea, in my opinion, to say, we don't want to fire people. That's not what we're looking to do. We're looking to increase output so we make more money so everybody can get paid more. We're looking to improve the company, make it stronger so everybody's better off. We want to make your jobs easier. We want to avoid all the problems. We want to take all those issues, the irritating things out.
Right. I mean, change always allows some form of resistance, right? Not with everyone, but there's always people that just on principle kind of resist change. How do you deal with that?
It's involving them and getting them to be part of the change. Identifying, and one of the reasons they don't like change is that they're going to make them uncomfortable. They're going to have to do something new, and they always like doing it this way. But when you come to them and ask them, how do we make it better? How do we make it easier? They want to do it that way. They're going to want to make it easier for them. So that's one kind of mental technique that I use to facilitate that. And having them buy into the idea, the bigger idea. Why are we doing this? Why are we making this better? I had somebody, I worked in a factory, and it was kind of a turnaround situation where they wanted to grow a lot, and they just needed someone to come in and help them put in lean and remove bottlenecks like we talked about. And the scheduler came to one day, and she says, and she was a pretty honest, open person, but she said, "You're just doing this to make yourself look good." I said, "No, that's not why I'm doing this. I want us to be able to work more efficiently. And if we can work more efficiently, we can hire more people. If we, we can have, so it's less stress," because she was doing 3 jobs and I was doing 4, and everybody was wearing all these multiple hats. I said, as we grow, we can hire other people. But we need to show a baseline of revenue to be able to get to that point. And once I explained it that way, she said, "Oh, okay, I understand now." And she bought in. But up to that point, she hadn't bought it. So and every person's going to be a little bit different. They're going to understand it differently. And maybe some people just are going to resist all the way through.
So why do you think she thought that you were just doing it to make yourself look good? What was lacking there?
It's communication, obviously. I had not done a good job of communicating why we were doing it and what our goals were. She didn't see the big picture. She didn't see the vision of the why of this. She thought, "Oh, Jared must be doing this so he can get a bigger bonus." That was what her mental process is I'm in it for myself. I don't care about anybody. I'm going to push him to work harder. And I was like, no, we need to show ownership, that we can drive a consistent baseline, that we can produce the same amount every single month. And once they see that, they're going to be comfortable. They're going to be willing to make more investments in people and equipment and technology.
Yeah.
One thing to steer it back into the lean conversation, Jared, I had a question, because when Friddy and I are talking to companies qualifying these roles, a lot, I would say, especially for our manufacturing clients, one of the most common things we get when people are looking for SNOP managers or planning managers or even just supply chain managers is companies want to get more lean. And I want to see with you, I know you've done consulting. Is there any specific data point or KPI that you look at to measure if that lean implementation is actually working? Because I feel like a lot of companies that we speak with say that they're getting lean, but really they're just reducing working hours and reducing inventory.
No, it's bottom line dollars. That's the obvious one. The whole goal of implementing lean is to make more money, if we're being completely blunt about it. You're either going to reduce the amount of man hours that are going into your product, or you are going to increase your output, right? You're going to reduce the amount of man hours to go through, but you're going to either reduce the cost of what you're producing, or you're going to increase your output and sell more product. And either way, you want to make more money. That's the goal of lean. And so I would say bottom line is the bottom line. That is exactly what you want to drive. That's how you measure everything. Now, are there other ways to measure productivity and efficiency? Oh, absolutely. And I am a huge proponent of data and using data. I actually wrote an online article for the Utah Business Magazine all about this. One of the big important things in my mind is seeing trends and involving everyone. 2 things: seeing the trends and involving everyone in the vision of what's going on. For example, I at one point ran a company, and I wouldn't run the company, but I was responsible for the operations and I was responsible for customer service. And one thing we could see was, you can see the trend of how many phone calls were being taken, how many orders were being processed. And as we watched that trend move, when it came time to decide, oh, so-and-so is leaving, do we need to replace them? Or we see the call volumes going up. Do we need to hire somebody else? Or, hey, and this is actually something that happened, we saw that the number of orders was going up, but the revenue was not going up. And we said, why is that? Because it's creating more work. We're becoming less lean by creating more work. We're doing way more work. There's more invoices that have to go out, more collections that have to happen. All of these things are multiplying throughout the business. It's not just our department, it's finance now that has to do more work. Why is this happening? And so we went back and said, okay, what can we do to fix this? And we said, okay, let's reach out to these customers that are starting to place orders every day instead of once a week and say, hey, can I give you a call on Thursday and collect all of the things you want to order? And be proactive about it. And that's just a little thing where in a process, you're looking at the trends, you're identifying what's going on, and you're making it more lean. And so if you're not seeing those data points, then you're not going to know that's happening. All you're going to see is, we're doing more work, oh, we're getting all these more orders, this is great, but at the end of the day, your bottom line hasn't changed.
So follow up on Evan's question, and I think that's where he was trying to go with that, is two sides to it. One, most companies say, we want to be more lean. How do you tell from your experience if a company is serious about that, or if they're just saying that and they have an idea board somewhere on the manufacturing floor and that's the extent of lean? And on the flip side, with candidates, every candidate says, yeah, I have lean experience, I have lean training, they have lean on their resume. How do you identify if they actually have the hands-on experience and the know-how versus just writing it on their resume?
Yeah, let me speak to the candidates first, because I think I'll give you a better answer on that. I think with candidates, it's examples. You go through and say, what is it that you have done? Give me an example. And once you start asking for specifics, you can tell whether somebody was on the sidelines in a meeting. There was a regular meeting that they had every week of lean, and somebody else was driving the boat, and they are in the room, but not really doing anything, or they're driving the boat. You start asking the right questions. And I think as a recruiter, Friddy, you have the opportunity, and with the background you guys have, to come in with that expertise and really start poking at them and understand that. So ask technical questions and identify actual things that they did. Talk about the process. That's the key, is talk about the process to implement those things and how they do it in very specific things. So once you get more granular, it becomes very clear, in my opinion, when somebody's done something and when somebody hasn't done something. For the businesses, that's a challenge. And I've worked in businesses where they want to improve, but they don't want to change. Maybe that's the way to say it. Like, they want everything to be better, but they don't want to invest money in a new hire, or they don't want to invest money in a new piece of equipment. And so I would almost say, and again, I'm not a recruiter, so this is just my opinion from my perspective. I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts are. I would ask them what their budget is. What is your budget outside of this hire? What is that person going to have to work with? Have they thought about that? If they come in and say, we need to spend a week with the plant shut down so we can move everything around and make it more lean, are you up to that? Are you willing to do that? Because sometimes that needs to happen. And there's a cost benefit to that, but is there a world in which you're going to shut down your plant for a week or a month even to disassemble everything and rebuild it in a lean fashion so that you can crank out more product? Or are you willing to go out and pay for training for your managers? You're bringing in this senior manager who has lean experience, but he's not going to be often, depending on the size of the company, he's not going to be one on the floor working with the employees every day. He's got other things he needs to worry about. And are you willing to let that person train and provide training materials, provide maybe a class or something, so that those managers are all on the same page and they know how to implement this?
Yeah, I think for us, a telltale sign is, and that's something we typically ask, is what are the 6 months deliverable for that? Right? Trying to get away from it, send a job description of what are the problems you're looking to solve by hiring for this role? What are some of the specifics? Again, going back to the specifics, right? And instead of saying implement lean, what are some of the processes you're looking to improve? What are some of the what does that 6 months roadmap look like? What does success look like for this role in the first 6 months? And the companies that have a clear answer on that typically also have a clear candidate profile in mind of what they're looking to hire, and then have the intention to actually run with it, versus companies that come to us and say, we don't know yet, and I think we need the candidate to tell us. And there's a number of different answers you get, and a lot of times that also causes then conflict in the hiring process, because the director of operations thought we're hiring somebody on the demand planning side. The plant manager thought they're hiring somebody on the purchasing side, and the last person thought they really needed somebody on the logistics piece of it. And in the end, a lot of times when we don't have that clear 6 months roadmap, what are the projects, what are really the specifics you're looking to solve with this hire, we run into issues in the hiring process later on as well.
Yeah, and I find that when I meet with companies, you mentioned something that was interesting. I'll go in with and whether it's a full-time role that I'm looking at or it's a consulting opportunity, I'll go in and say, okay, with the mindset, what is the problem? What is it? They're willing to spend a lot of money to hire me. Why am I worth it? What is it that they are seeing that's costing them money, or that they need fixed? What is that value that I'm supposed to bring to this role or this opportunity? And I think what you said there is helping them identify that as an organization is critical, because sometimes you have people that have, maybe they're 3 different problems, and maybe you're only talking to one person about the role, and you get a candidate in there, they don't like the candidate because one of the guys loves the candidate, the other two don't, because it's his issue and you found the perfect person to fix his problem, but there are two other problems that aren't being addressed, right?
Yeah. And that stakeholder alignment, right, internally is critical, I think, to avoiding hiring mistakes, making sure that everybody who's involved in the hiring process is on the same page, agrees on the profile and the experience and the skills we're hiring for, versus just saying, hey, we're hiring a supply chain manager and everybody involved in it has a different idea of what that supply chain manager is supposed to do. So definitely something we run into quite a bit, and we're trying to get ahead of, right, by having the intake calls and involving as many stakeholders as we can to make sure we're all looking for the same thing, and we're all having on board with what that ideal candidate profile looks like.
I was just going to say, I would say there's a drastic difference in companies that we are able to find that alignment with in their hiring, how quick we're able to place, than companies that don't. Because a lot of times with the companies that do not have that alignment or even won't work with us to create a candidate profile, a lot of times the position just goes unfilled.
Yeah.
Especially in larger organizations, right? The larger organizations get, the harder it becomes to really change their internal processes and get the stakeholders to buy in. And I think on average, I would agree that those hires definitely take longer. And sometimes the expectations are also unrealistic, right? Sometimes the companies are looking for somebody that has a set of skills and experience that just isn't feasible either in that location with the salary requirements they have, and not having that transparent conversation up front is definitely detrimental. And that just, right, the larger companies get, the harder are those conversations to have typically, because they have their salary brackets, they have their process, their systems, and changing any of that is almost impossible. Talking about hiring and careers, what do you see SNOP lean going to in the next 10 years? What are some of the most relevant skills, and how can you as somebody on the job market make sure you stand out?
Yeah, that's a really great question. There's a lot of talk about AI. So let me talk about AI for just a second. And I had a conversation actually with some students just this week. We were talking about careers and what they wanted to do and whatnot. And we talked a little bit about AI. I said, look, I've been using AI in supply chain for 20 years. And they said, what? You've been using AI for 20 years? Absolutely. What do you mean? I said, we had algorithms that made forecasting predictions. And so I would put my data into a system. It would go through my historical information. It would pick its best algorithm that matched what had happened historically, and it would make projections using that algorithm. That's an AI. That's artificial intelligence. That's exactly what that was. And so what we're seeing today is that the power and the capacity of the AI is increasing significantly, and it's moved into languages, and it's moved into things that I think are actually pretty amazing. I think we could all say that. Now, I will say I would never in a million years put my historical data into ChatGPT and say, please make a projection for me as to what I'm going to need to purchase going forward. That's insane. Maybe somebody's doing that, more power to them, but I'm not to that point where I trust it yet. But having said that, I know there are companies that are going out and finding ways to integrate AI into forecasting, into supply chain, into plants, using, especially in large scale manufacturing. That's really valuable because you can measure every tenth that comes off the line automatically with visual inspection. You can get trends. You can wear a black belt before would have put together all these trends using going out with his calipers and measuring parts. Now that can be done visually. They can be done visually through a robot or whatever visual system inspection system they have. And then that data can be fed directly into a system, and that could be processed, and they can create that information. So
I think we gotten to the point where there was too much data, and that's something we've run into quite a bit with clients. It's like, we have so much data, we don't know what to do with it. And it gotten so overwhelming that I think the AI can really help. But it's how you use AI. You have to understand the limitations of AI, and you have to be able to, I think, you need to know where you want to get to. You need to know what data you want. You need to know where you want it from. And then AI can help you collect it, analyze it,
That's it.
visualize it. But if you don't have a clear picture and just say, hey, AI, tell me what this data means, you're going to get unreliable results. And yeah, you're not going to be better off. So I think, right, there's a skill to using AI that people
Couldn't
who
agree more.
embrace it are going to be much more equipped to become more productive, to become more effective. And right, but yeah, there's a skill within prompting AI, and I think really knowing the limitations of AI, right? Knowing what I can trust and knowing where I need to double check and where I need to go in and manually control, I think is huge. Because yeah, I think AI has taken leaps, but I also feel like it's already slowed down a little bit, and I'm glad it's slowing down, because if it would keep improving like it had been.
Well, I think it's hitting its wall, right? It's hitting its limits, and we're finding the limits of what it can and can't do. We're feeling that out now.
Yeah, I think the application of AI, right, it feels like those large language models have plateaued a little bit, but I think there's going to be the implementations of how you can tie it together and where you can use it is going to advance still quite a bit. But yeah, I think, like you said, AI is not taking necessarily somebody's job, but not knowing how to use AI might lose your job.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. You talked a little bit about data as well and the importance of being able, you mentioned a couple of things, being able to know where to get the data from, which is critical, and then how to use it. And I have a little brother who has a PhD in meteorology. He's not, he's in his 40s, but he's not young, but he has a PhD in meteorology. And what he did in meteorology was use algorithms to predict using data and he's transitioned his skills into the business world. And that's an amazing talent. That's an amazingly valuable thing to have. A couple of years ago, when I started my current role, I've been used to working in systems where we had access to information, and our system wasn't great at that. So I brought in an intern who was a data science intern, and she was one of the smartest people I've ever had working for me, just amazing. And she taught me a ton of how to get the data and how to use the AI to help me code and use and get the information, get what I wanted out of the system, and be able to look at trends. As I mentioned before, I love trends, look at trends, and then not use the AI. It would set me up to do forecasting, because I could see relationships and see what had happened, who had done what. And knowing how to code is helpful, but knowing how to use the AI to help you code is really helpful, because I'm not a coder, not at all, but right. I know enough now to prompt the AI to give me the code that I need. And I know how to troubleshoot it if I get, if something doesn't work, and that's a trick. You have to go back and verify everything, because the AI sometimes will make it look like it did what you asked it to, and it's not even close, or it may be just barely off, and that's just as bad.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think AI will eliminate a lot of the entry-level tactical jobs? Not necessarily replacing them, but we don't need to backfill them. But right, that day-to-day tactical planning, procurement, sending out POs, following up with invoices. Do you feel like AI is going to replace that? And if you said you talk to students, right? Are you telling them, hey, you need to focus on the strategic side?
Yes and no. So I've had buyers. I've been a buyer long ago. I've worked for buyers, and there's a value in having a buyer, because the system, again, MRP systems, AI systems, whatever it may be, make mistakes. And you need somebody that's going to go in, and when all of a sudden the system's telling you to buy 10,000 of something when you've only ever bought 500, there needs to be a human or a very good system.
Do you need maybe just one instead of 3 humans there?
Maybe, but I think that there is that check, that human check that understands and asks questions. Wait a minute, why are we doing this? And they'll go back and do a little bit of research. They'll pick up the phone and call somebody, say, what's going on here? So there is a human touch that I don't think will ever be lost, in my opinion. Maybe we'll get to that point at some point. And again, that's trusting the system, right?
It's about responsibility, accountability, right? If AI did it, I feel like we always want somebody where we can say, hey, this is on you. You should have caught that.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And when it's the AI, now you've just lost trust with the AI. And then what do you do? If I don't trust my system, now I have to check all the orders, and I don't have somebody to do that. I didn't hire anybody because I got to put the AI in place. I think, and I spoke with somebody last week who has a firm, and they implement AI in businesses. And we spoke because they wanted to start doing this in manufacturing. And I think it's a great opportunity, but I think there still needs to be a human element to verify, because I don't think we're to the point where we can trust that AI is going to make 100% of the decisions 100% of the time. And sometimes it will. If you give it good input, it's going to do a mathematical calculation. It's going to give you X, Y, and Z. Normally you're good. But I've seen MRP, which is, again, the same thing. I've seen it do crazy things. And I've seen people fat finger in. They say, okay, the forecast is 100, and they add an extra 2 somewhere in there because their finger hit it. And now it says it's 10,020 or 1,020. Yeah. And that drives through the system. And somebody on the other end needs to catch that, in my opinion. So yes. So the answer is yes and no. I think that AI is going to be critical. It's going to make people more efficient. And I think that it's really important to understand. I don't think, at least during the rest of my career, I don't think AI is going to be replacing people in all of their roles. It may make people more efficient, but I look at it, and I've said this a couple different times in different places. I look at AI like the computer, the personal computer, the change that we went through, right? Everybody thought, oh man, these personal computers, they can do all these crazy things. We're not going to need people. And to be honest, they were right. I remember working for a man who's told me about the typing pool that they had when he started. Write his notes up and go take it down to the typing pool, have somebody type it up for him. All those jobs are gone. Every one of us now needs to type our own email. For the most part, people type their own emails, right? Or do voice or something. So is there going to be change? There is. And technology is always going to make those changes. Is it going to be wholesale change? Not in the short term, I don't think. But I would also always say, if you're good at strategy, focus on strategy. If you're good at doing things repetitively, do that. Do the thing that you're really good at. And if you want to get into operations, you want to get into strategy, learn how to analyze things, learn how to see the big picture, and learn how to help people do their jobs. And I say that, I tell people all the time, one of the best measures of your ability in your career is going to be your ability to help other people do their jobs so that you can do your jobs when they don't report to you. If I need a bill paid, an invoice processed because my vendor is getting upset at me and they're not delivering to me, I've got to go help the person down in accounts payable understand that I need that bill paid, right? They don't work for me a lot, most of the time. So how do I get that person to do their job so that I can do my job? And that's going to be critical, especially if you're a buyer and you're trying to get your product and you don't have any authority, any seniority, and you're walking across the hall of the finance group. How do you get them to help you? And I think that's a critical skill, those people skills.
Jared, where can our viewers find you and learn a little bit more about you?
Well, you can find me on my website, www.jaredpaget.com, JaredPaget, or on LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn. I'm always active there.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.